Hey, Jarrett Fuller here. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. This week, we are rebroadcasting my 2018 conversation with Rudy VanderLans. This was a special conversation for me because when I started getting interested in design writing all the way back when I was in high school, I kept reading people talk about something called Emigre Magazine. And then I noticed that many of the writers that I was drawn to, people like Kenneth FitzGerald or Andrew Blauvelt or Lorraine Wild or Mr. Keedy, they all seemed to be writing for Emigre. I remember finding some PDFs online or reprints in other books. It was, then it was a little bit harder to kind of find a lot of this stuff. And even then, I realized that Emigre was doing something different and something important, even though it would be years before I ever saw any real copies of the magazine myself. And so when I started Scratching the Surface, Rudy was near the top of the list of sort of dream guests. And so to get to talk to Rudy, who co-founded the magazine with Zuzana Licko, felt like a culmination of everything I had been working towards. He was so generous with his time. I enjoyed this conversation so much, and it just felt like a milestone to check off of. To check off the podcast. So to this day, Emigre still holds a special place in my life and my work and my thinking about what design writing is and can be. And its influence is still pervasive all over the graphic design writing space. So I was so honored to speak to Rudy, and I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation again. Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. This is a big one. I am very excited because on this week's episode, I finally talked to the one and only Rudy VanderLans. Rudy probably does not need an introduction. He is a designer, he's a photographer, and he is the founder of Emigre, the type foundry he created with his wife, Zuzana Licko, that published the great magazine of design writing, Emigre Magazine. Rudy and Emigre have kind of hovered over this podcast since I started. The magazine comes up in almost every episode, it feels like, and I've talked to so many people who got their start writing about design in the pages of Emigre, from Randy Nakamura to Burdick, Dimitri Siegel, Kenneth FitzGerald, Mr. Keedy. It's just some of the best design writing was published in that magazine, in my opinion. And I think in so many ways, the 90s were kind of this golden age of design writing. And I was really looking forward to finally talking to Rudy about how he views that era and his work with Emigre. We obviously talk about Emigre a lot, but we also talk about his own background and his evolving interest in design. We talk about his interest in photography and why he decided to close the magazine at the time that he did. This conversation really means a lot to me. If you've listened to this podcast regularly, I'm sure you know how influential Emigre was to my own design education and specifically my interest in design writing. And I'm just so honored to have him on the show. This is truly a special one for me. Remember, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year to receive an exclusive monthly newsletter with additional content and episode previews. Memberships really help keep the podcast going, and I just really appreciate all of your support and hope that you really enjoy this conversation with the great Rudy VanderLans. If it's okay with you, I would love to start all the way back at the beginning with, I've been familiar with your work for basically as long as I've been familiar with graphic design, but I don't actually know how you got into all of this. Where did your interest in graphic design come from?
I went to art school in Holland. I grew up in Holland.
Right. I did know that.
Went to school in Holland. I attended the Royal Academy of Art in The Hague.
Okay.
What we refer to as the Kunstakademie, which is the art academy, we call it. And I wanted to become an illustrator. But there was no such thing as a program that would teach you that. The closest I could get to it was to basically go to the graphic design program at the academy. And they had a little bit of illustration, but that was basically a graphic design education that I just fell into by accident.
Okay.
I just happened to really like it.
Did you know, like when you signed up for that program or joined that department, did you know what graphic design was? Did that term mean anything to you, or you just saw that as a way to do illustration?
I think I had an idea of what graphic design was. I mean, it's hard not to when you grow up in Holland. It's everywhere, and it's important. But really, when I entered the program, which was a great program, by the way, it was very foundational and very basic. Less is more. Crystal Goblet, form, function, Bauhausian design education. I sort of got to know what graphic design is all about right there and then, and a whole new world opened up to me, and I thought it was just right on the money. I took to it like a fish to water, and I think the reason for that is why I ended up it was sort of taught so straightforward. It was really almost like a vocational school. I mean, they really taught you a trade. It was all studio classes, with a lot of emphasis on problem solving and technique.
Yeah.
It's all about making things with your hands, which I really liked. There was a lot of emphasis put on making, putting together mock-ups and mechanicals.
Right.
Really important. We spent so much time doing that kind of work, how to draw a perfect line with pen and ink.
Right.
How to draw a perfect circle, with pen and ink. Color studies. It was something that I really took to immediately. I really enjoyed it. It was perfectly explained, and we had some great teachers. Gerrit Noordzij was there, the famous type designer and type educator. All the teachers were people that were all practicing designers. And, after 4 years of that, we were basically ready to clean up the world,
Right.
Get rid of all the ugly typefaces in the world and all the bad design. It was very ideological and it was intoxicating, and I never dared question any of it. It was all it was all like the gospel,
Yeah.
But it was an amazing education, and that's where I learned everything there was to know about graphic design. And after 4 years, you could land a job anywhere. And actually, it was a 5-year. The 5th year was an apprenticeship, basically. So you had to land an apprenticeship with a studio and do that for about 3 or 4 months. And I was super lucky. I landed a job with Total Design.
Oh, wow.
In Amsterdam, which was, where Wim Grauwel and Bos and even Anton Beke were all there at the time. They were like the royalty of Dutch design. I was so lucky to get that. And I ended up working there for about 3 or 4 months. And they were at that time, and I think it was like 79, because I was in school from 75 to 79 at the Art Academy. And at Total Design, when I was there, they were working on this gigantic identity program for the PTT, which is the Dutch Post, Telephone, and Telecommunications. And that's such a huge identity program. There were actually 3 studios working on that. It was Total Design, Tel Design, and Studio Dunbar.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was so large.
Yeah.
And I was there at Total Design, and I got to do some production work actually on some of the identity manuals for that program. So they gave me a great introduction to what it means to be working on identity design, which now they call branding design.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So so I didn't know that you had kind of gotten your start at Total Design, but something that's really shocking to me in a way is that you went through this very formal, rigorous, kind of almost gospel education where there are all of these rules, crystal goblet, and that you didn't question that at all? Because I feel like if you have any reputation, which you have many, but one of them is kind of being more experimental, being against a lot of those things, at least visually. So when did you start to kind of question that, or how did you start questioning that?
I was probably the quietest kid in class all throughout art school. I was in the back of the class. I was a fairly mediocre student.
Oh, wow.
The questioning part started when I came, I think, much later, when I came to California. I was, I never dared to question but there was no questioning going on at school at all, by the way.
Right.
I think it was very, there was no theory being taught in art school when I was there. There was no history, hardly. I think I read about 3 or 4 books during the 4 years in art school, and they were all about technique. They were all about how to how to set letters by hand, how to print, all the stuff, all the information you need to know about offset printing and whatnot. And there was a book about technique of photography. There was no theory at all. I had never heard of anything like theory in design, writing about design. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. So
why?
Wait. So when did you end up coming? When did you move to California?
Well, after my 3 months at Total Design, because that was an apprenticeship, and by the way, which was I think partially subsidized by the government.
Oh wow!
I got a salary actually. The Dutch government paid half of that.
Wow.
Typically, I don't know if that still exists, but after that, I worked for 2 years at Forum 5, which was a much smaller studio in The Hague for Bart de Groot and Joop de Ridder, and that was also. It was a small studio, but they also worked on a lot of identities, a lot of work for the government. Mm-hmm. The Hague, where I grew up and where I went to school, that's where the government is seated in Holland. It's not the capital of Holland, but it's Amsterdam. But the government is seated in The Hague. So Forum 5 was based in The Hague, and there was a lot of work that came from the government, a lot of departments that had their own identities and whatnot. Mm. So I did a lot of that kind of work at Forum 5, but that was cut short because I was being drafted into the Army. And, in those days, there was still a draft. I don't think it's there anymore. So before being drafted, I thought I'm going to enjoy myself. So I took this 2-month trip across the United States by Greyhound bus.
Oh, wow.
From New York to California. And I ended up in Berkeley. And I visited UC Berkeley. And then on a whim, while I was there, I decided to apply to their graduate. They had a small graduate program in design.
Okay.
And so after that, went back to Holland. Then I, entered the Army.
Yeah.
But I got discharged after 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I won't go into that. It's not one of my proudest moments.
Okay. All right.
But I got out. And then I got hired by Tel Design, which is the former studio of Dunbar. And I worked there with Paul Vermeijs. And that was also a lot of identity design. That's really big in Holland at that time. And a lot of studios, that was their bread and butter, which actually I didn't take to very easily. I didn't really enjoy that too much. And that was cut short. I was there for maybe a year and a half or so. That was cut short because one day I come home and there's a letter in the mail from UC Berkeley. Okay. And I was admitted.
And wait, how long after this?
What's that?
How much time has passed since you had applied by this point?
Well, just about a year and a half or something like that. Yeah, I mean, and all throughout, I was sending them slides and.
Okay.
And I had and it was there was this whole thing. It was actually. I wouldn't say easy to get into UC Berkeley, but I got in. But it was much harder actually to get into the United States because I had to prove I had like $10,000 in the bank. I had to go to the American Embassy in The Hague twice for interviews. Right. What was I going to do? Was I going to be able to take care of myself? and everything. So that was all settled. I went to UC Berkeley, and then, that's how I ended up in California. And was that your question? I forget now.
Yeah. How you got to California?
Yeah, and I ended up in UC Berkeley, and I actually ended up studying photography there for 2 years. They had, by the time I ended up at UC Berkeley, they had actually done away with their graphic design program. So they said, but if you'd like, you can just do photography. And I said, well, sure, I'll sign up for that. And I did. I studied photography in their master's program for about 2 years, and that's where I met Zuzana Licko, my wife.
Okay.
Yeah, who was there as a.
And she was studying also.
She was studying as an undergraduate in the architecture program.
Okay.
So she was going to become an architect, which halfway through she switched. She changed her major to visual communications, but that's where we met.
Okay.
Right?
And then, so were you thinking that you were going to become a photographer, or like what was that like being in that program focusing on photography?
Yes, I was actually pretty disillusioned, or had completely given up on graphic design. I didn't miss it. I think my experiences, as great as they were, working at Total Design and Tel Design and Forum 5, the whole idea of working on corporate identities and working for clients that I really had no affinity towards at all, didn't suit me, really.
Yeah.
I really felt like I also wasn't a very good team player. Couldn't imagine myself really working at a studio. And again, don't want to say anything bad about these studios I worked. They were really terrific places to be.
Right.
And I look back upon that time as a very, very valuable and great time in my life. But in terms of graphic design, if that was what graphic design was all about, it didn't interest me all that much, actually. Turns out. And so I started doing photography, and I really, really enjoyed that. But there at UC Berkeley, I think that's where I started to, it was a graduate program. There were only 4 or 5 other graduate students there doing photography. It was very small, and it was all about critical thinking.
Okay.
This was UC Berkeley, and this was really difficult for me to get used to, because for me, all throughout my schooling in Holland, and it was always about making stuff and say as little about it as I could get away with.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say about it. I just wanted to make stuff. But at UC Berkeley, it was the exact opposite. People would just sit around the table and talk about the work.
Yeah.
The work was almost like a byproduct. It was almost not very important. It was sort of a starting point to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, I made a big mistake, because it's like I have nothing to say about any of this. Nothing. I mean, I was, again, the quiet kid in the back of the class. I had a real difficulty with that. Actually, I never graduated because in order to get the master's degree, I had to do a small exhibit of my work, a project. That I was able to do. I love that. Make the photographs and everything. I was actually silk screening on top of photographs, and
interesting.
I pulled all that off, but I also had to write a thesis. I had to write about the work. I had no idea what to say about it. So I completely failed at that. I couldn't get that together, and I never graduated because of that, and also because I ran out of money. I had to find a job, and through some strange fluke, I ended up working as a graphic designer in the art department at the San Francisco Chronicle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was a bit of an accident, because I actually wanted to work. I felt I had to go and make some money after school. Photography wasn't going to pay the bills. I said, well, I'm a graphic designer. I can work, show my portfolio. I can, find a job problem. I felt very confident about that. So I wanted to work for Chronicle Books. So I called up Chronicle Books, and I said, can I come show my portfolio? And they said, yeah, sure, come on by. Go there, and I show up, and it turns out I had called the wrong people. I had called the Chronicle. So I
Wow.
thought, geez, I think I'm in the wrong place. But it turns out they actually had a job opening, and they said, why don't you just show your portfolio? And I did that. And at that time, I was so relaxed because I
Yeah.
thought I don't want to work at the newspaper. I was on my way out already, sort of. But I showed my portfolio, and they said, "Well, we like it. If you'd like, the job is here for you to have.
Wow.
If you want to do this, you'll have to do some illustration work, some design work, all kinds of stuff." And the job pays, what was it, $23,000 a year,
Oh, wow.
plus medical insurance and whatnot, which was like a fortune for me at the time. Um, and I said, okay, I'll take it. And this was in 1983, I believe, and I worked there for about 3 years.
Okay.
And I did a lot of illustration work, and I did all the covers for the TV Guide and the date book and the book review, all these sort of special inserts for the Sunday newspaper. And it was it was the complete opposite in terms of design from the way I'd been educated and from where I worked before, where design is seen as this really serious thing that can help save the world. Whereas at Chronicle, it's like they broke every rule in the book of typography. It's like they did everything wrong according to what I had learned,
Right.
They were justifying type, in columns that were 1.5 inches wide. It's like, you can't do that, but it was kind of interesting to see that you could break all these rules and you could still have, hundreds of thousands of people reading the newspaper every day, and they had no problems at all with the fact that we were breaking all the rules.
Right.
So that was another sort of interesting thing to be exposed to in my life in design.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really interesting how a lot of these threads that you could kind of weave through your whole career were all kind of right there from the beginning, coming from a very traditional education to then working at a newspaper where you start to kind of break the rules a little bit, to being in the photography program that was all about theory or criticism. And when did you start to realize that all of these things maybe fit together in some way?
Well, that happened when we were doing Emigre Magazine, which I started at the time that I was at the Chronicle, 83, 84. I think the first issue of Emigre came out in 84. And that came about because, I still had aspirations to be a photographer.
Okay.
And, it's very hard to break into it. And together with two other Dutch friends, other artists who are also living here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, who are also struggling to getting their work published, we had this brilliant idea of, why don't we publish our own magazine? That way, we can show our work and get it out, into the world. Of course, we had no idea, how difficult it was to do a magazine. It's probably why we ended up doing it, because we didn't know how difficult that could be. So we started Emigre, and we emptied our bank accounts.
Okay.
This is before Kickstarter, and we printed up 500 copies of Emigre. And immediately found out how hard it is to distribute a magazine.
Yeah.
I would basically grab as many copies as I could carry under my arm, get on the BART train, go to San Francisco, and literally go to every bookstore and newsstand I knew of, and just walk in and say, "Hey, I have this great new magazine. It's called Emigre. Would you like to buy some copies?" And they said, "No." They said, we don't deal with publishers. We get our stuff through distributors. Right. I said, well, wait, I am the distributor. Here's my magazine.
Right.
You can buy it directly from me. It's no, that's not how it works. So then after about 6 or 7 bookstores, there was actually one bookstore who said, they liked what they saw. And they said, why don't you give me 3 copies? Mm-hmm. I said, 3 copies? But I said, okay, but that's $6, I said. I said, no, that's not how it works. We don't pay for it right on the, on the spot. It's all consignment. We'll pay for it, after we sell it. And I
Right.
thought, oh my God, this is going to be really, really hard. And it was, it was impossible.
Yeah.
But we started the magazine and we did that for about 3 or 4 issues with my two Dutch friends who were probably a lot smarter than me at the time. And they figured it out pretty quickly that this was a losing proposition.
Yeah.
And they went off and went on to bigger and better things. And they left the magazine basically with me and Zuzana.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in 85, 84, 85. And this is when, this is also when the Macintosh was
Right.
introduced.
Right.
And this is when we started, we got the 128K Macintosh. And that's all part of history in a way. Zuzana found this little public domain software that allowed you to design your own typefaces.
Yeah.
Which, had always been possible for anybody to design a typeface, but it was always really, really hard to then implement it and actually use it. But, the Macintosh made all that possible. You could literally design a typeface.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with bitmaps, this was before PostScript.
Right.
Bitmaps, placing little blocks on top of each other, so to speak. But you could store it into the computer and you could then use it.
Yeah.
And Zuzana loved it. I mean, she started cranking out typefaces, and I started using those typefaces in the magazine. We printed out on an image printer and whatnot, and we put it on a stat camera and statted it down.
Yeah.
And that became for us, a cheap way to do typesetting for the magazine, because up to that point we had to basically buy typesetting, which is very expensive, or we used a typewriter and whatnot, or Letraset and whatnot. So, but this Macintosh allowed us to design our own typefaces and then actually set type with it. And that, saved a lot of money with that. Plus, it set us completely apart from every other magazine.
Right.
In terms of the typefaces that we were using. And that actually caused a lot of people to pay attention, I think. And
what was Zuzana doing at the time? Was she working as a designer also?
Yeah, she had started slowly to work as a graphic designer, and she did small design jobs here and there. But when the Macintosh came out, and later with PostScript, Adobe started to digitize a lot of the classic typefaces, and they needed people to basically do the bitmap editing for all those typefaces.
Oh, yeah.
Because, screen presentation, every size was bitmap edited.
Oh, wow.
So Zuzana spent just hundreds of hours bitmap editing, the classics in Helvetica and Basketball for Adobe.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
So she was doing that. That was a fairly decent income for her. And then she was doing still, small graphic design works. And we just basically scrambling. Mm-hmm. And for a little while, actually, when people started noticing the bitmap fonts in Emigre Magazine, some graphic designers were sort of intrigued by it, and they would contact us and they would ask us, we'd like to use these typefaces in our work. How can we do that? So Zuzana would literally typeset bitmap fonts for other designers. So they would order headlines from her. She would set type on the Macintosh computer. She would basically stat it down on a stat camera or blow it up, and then she would sell a line of type.
Oh, that's amazing.
On photographic paper that graphic designers would then use and would put in their, into their layouts by pasting it up. Yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting to me though, because I'm curious kind of when you realized, let me back up for a second. I think it's interesting that kind of the way that the magazine started to gain attention was through this kind of customized or kind of interesting or different typography. When did you guys realize that both sides of that could be an interesting business, both the type design and this kind of new publishing venture, that you were able to kind of go out on your own and say, this is actually possible? Right.
Well, I think we quickly understood that the magazine was just the perfect promotional tool for the typefaces.
Right.
and the typefaces up till today is what drives everything that we do. It pays for everything that we do.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the magazine was always a loss leader in a sense. It
Right.
never made any money. But it was a perfect promotional tool to show off the typefaces, and we understood that pretty quickly. And whereas in the beginning, Zuzana was setting type for designers, it became, and that had a lot to do with the fact that it took a while for graphic designers to actually accept the Macintosh computer.
Yeah.
I mean, using the machine for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It wasn't really until the mid 90s that designers were, PostScript had been introduced, and the layout programs like Ready, Set, Go and whatnot, and the PageMaker, allowed designers to finally use this machine, because in the beginning they thought the Macintosh was a huge step backwards. I mean, look at these typefaces. It's like from the Flintstone area. They thought. So there was, but little by little, designers started to see that there was some value there, and before we knew it, they were asking not just for us to set type, but they were asking, can we get copies of the typefaces? And we go like, you know what? Yes, we can make copies of them and sell them on disc, and put the fonts on floppy disks and started selling the fonts that way. And then, we had this digital product that kept selling better and better, and then lo and behold, all of a sudden the internet comes along, and we're sitting on this digital product that we can now actually sell over the internet, which we didn't see any of that coming. So I think we were one of the first foundries that sold typefaces online.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a bit crude. It was, but it took a little while for a font to actually be transmitted over the phone wires. But that part of our business grew really, really fast.
Okay.
And it showed us that I was able to give up my job at the Chronicle. Zuzana stopped working for Adobe and stopped working as a freelance designer, because very quickly we were able to do everything simply by selling type. And that included publishing the magazine.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that in the... Correct me if this is wrong, but I think in kind of the Emigre legend, or the way that the story is often told today, it's often forgotten that early issues of the magazine were essentially type specimens and kind of were a way to sell your own typefaces. When did you start to kind of bring in writers or include interviews, or realize that these don't just have to be showing off the typography, but we could actually add new content to them also?
Right. Well, 1984, 85, from there on, there was just graphic design was basically being turned upside down. Yeah. For a whole variety of reasons. And it wasn't just the Macintosh, although it played a big role, obviously. But, it was also the time when postmodernism started to pop up within the discussions that designers had. There was a lot of interest in the vernacular. But, schools like, I remember vividly the first time I saw Kathy McCoy give a lecture at CCA in Oakland when they were still based in Oakland. And I was just blown away.
Yeah.
She was showing, and I'm guessing this must have been in 89 or something.
Okay.
And the work she was showing at that time was just, it's funny because the work that she was showing, there were a lot of the same sort of formal and graphic gestures made that we were making, and there was a big moving away from this very staid, formulaic Swiss international modern design. Yeah. And I was really attracted to that, but I found out that they had arrived at that work by reading Barthes and Derrida and
Yeah.
all, the French theorists and whatnot. I had arrived at what I thought was a similar solution or alternative from looking at the work of Hart Werken in Holland and Piet Smulders and Jan van Toorn. Very, very different. But the way it sort of all expressed itself on the page, on the paper, was kind of the same. I mean, I felt a lot of affinity towards that. And I remember going to Cranbrook for 3 days to do a workshop and to spend 3 days with the students there, which eventually ended up as an issue of Emigre number 19. I remember being so nervous going there because I thought, here's all these designers, all these kids, they've like done nothing but study and read
right.
Barthes, whatnot. And I'd never read any of that stuff. I tried, actually. I couldn't get into it. So I did read, Learning from Las Vegas, his book, and I did like that a lot. So I came there, and I was just so completely nervous about talking to them about these issues, because I thought, intellectually I'm not there at all.
Yeah.
But that turned out to be not the case. I don't think that ever came up. I think we really enjoyed just talking about the fact that, there's a lot of other ways to practice design. There's the easy, flush left, ragged right, Helvetica design is one way of designing, but there's many other ways to design. And I was very attracted to, the whole idea of the personal voice of the designer, allowing that voice of the designer to be in the work, which of course with most modern design was
right.
Not really, it was frowned upon.
Yeah.
So I liked all of that.
I mean, I have this theory that I kind of would love to run by you and see what you think. And I think I've been thinking, I've talked to 70 something people about kind of design criticism or design writing over the last 2 years. And obviously Emigre comes up all the time. I've talked to a bunch of the people who have written for you, but and often what it comes up in the context of, could something like that exist today? Like the way that publication existed was so singular and so of its time that I think Emigre could not have existed in any other time before in history, and I don't think would probably work now. And I think it's because of all those things you're talking about. This kind of rise of postmodernism and interest in critical theory, the introduction of the Macintosh, I think the stuff that was happening at Cranbrook, I think just the kind of insularity of graphic design or the smallness of the profession. Were you, so my first question is, do you, thinking back on it, would you kind of agree with that? And then the second part of the question is, were you aware that all of these things were coming together and that you and the work that you and Zuzana were doing were kind of right in the middle of all of that?
There's a lot of questions.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Once I got going, I couldn't stop.
Right. Well, I mean, it was a very special time, and I think a lot of the writing and a lot of the essays and a lot of the navel gazing, I mean, it all came out of the work. The work was there first. You can't have all this stuff if it wasn't for the work. There was a lot to talk about, and we were questioning a lot of things, all the younger designers. And then the older designers, and this sounds terribly ageist, but, the established designers, to use a better word, they started to react to what we were saying. And the thing is, it all played itself out within a couple of magazines, publications. It was Print Magazine, it was I Magazine, and it was perhaps Emigre Magazine. And these, especially Print, and there were national, international magazines. If you wanted to know what was going on in design, that's where you went. And these magazines all talked to each other.
Right.
They responded to each other. So everybody sort of knew what the dialogues what the conversations were and what they were about. But again, it all started as a reaction to the work that was being produced. So I asked myself the same question you just asked, and it's like, could that exist now? And if it doesn't, why not? And I guess the only answer I can come up with is like, well, maybe the work isn't there.
Well, yeah.
Talk about
Yeah.
in a way that gets everybody red in the face, because people really got quite upset and got really angry. I remember, you probably heard the story, the famous interview that Print Magazine did with Massimo Vignelli and Ed Benguia.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the two gods of design, New York, and they spent half the interview talking about what they called it. They referred to Emigre as a garbage factory.
Right.
They thought it was all awful work. It's going to be the downfall of design. I mean, and as hurtful as it was at the time, I think back at that and I go like, yeah, but it was so great because these guys, they literally sat down and they talked about this. I mean, you get that anymore? I don't know if that is still taking place, where people literally speak their mind about these issues very honestly, and publish that. You don't see that anymore, at least not within design.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephen Heller writing an article about ugly. Ugly. They called all that stuff that we were publishing, and all the people, Cranbrook and Hart Werken and Cal Arts, it was considered to be ugly design. And again, you gotta. I can only say, Steve, thank you very much. It's just amazing that he dared to put his mouth where his thoughts were. That he was willing to go out on a limb and say that. And there was a huge backlash that lasted for years. Yeah, people are still talking about it.
Yeah,
I'm still talking about it.
I mean, but did that embolden you at all of wanting to push it further, or wanting to kind of find where those edges were, seeing these people who are at the top of the field kind of questioning what you were doing?
Well, at first, of course, when I first read that interview with Massimo Vignelli, calling us a garbage factory, I mean, I was devastated.
Oh yeah, of course.
He was. I really like Vignelli's work, but I also quickly realized that up to that point, not too many people knew what Emigre was about or what Emigre was.
Yeah.
But you get that published in Print Magazine, which had a huge circulation. All of a sudden, a lot of people thought, who are these people, Emigre? They started paying attention to us, and it also, I think at that point, that really helped me started writing about my own work. I mean, the sort of attacks or the criticism that came from the establishment helped me sort of really think deeply about what I was doing. Right. And that's when I sort of started to, little by little, get my feet wet, and trying to write about design. I mean, up until that point, I had mostly done interviews, which all came from, just ask the question, why? It's like, why? I saw that work at Cranbrook. It looked a little bit like what we were doing, but I wanted to know how they arrived at it. And so I just kept asking the question, why are you doing? It's like, you can you can do interviews like that. And fill many pages of Emigre, which is what I did. But then later I started to think, well, maybe I should answer some of these questions myself. And I started to think about design and why I design in a certain way and why I do things in a certain way. And I little by little started to write. But I am not I don't give anybody the impression that I'm a theorist. I am absolutely not. The real writers in Emigre were the people and you've interviewed them all on your program. Kenneth FitzGerald and Jeffrey Keedy and Lorraine Wild and Andrew Blauvelt and Ann Burdick and Diane Gromal. I mean, and I did not initiate those writings. Those writings were around. They either like Lorraine's writings were, I think they existed as lectures, and I just happened to hear the lecture, and I would ask her, can we publish this in Emigre? Because what you're just saying blows my mind,
Yeah.
And she goes, sure, and this, I think, Anne Burdick's first piece that we published, I think, was her thesis project,
Yeah.
And I thought, Jesus, such amazing pieces of writing about design. That's such, it sort of opened up. I mean, I got my graduate design education in design theory from these people, from publishing their articles, reading their articles, trying to understand them, and help them publish them. And I think my strength and my talent, if you want to call it that, was publishing the articles and trying to find an audience for it. I mean, that's I think where my strengths were.
Well, and that was I'm glad that you said that, because that was a question that I wanted to ask you about. It was both kind of how you found these people, or were you kind of commissioning pieces, or were people submitting to you, or how that kind of process of how these essays made it into the magazine. But then also if you had some sort of, I don't know, some sort of editorial strategy, or how did you know that a piece was an Emigre piece or would fit in your vision for Emigre, if you even had a vision for Emigre?
Yeah. Well, as we were getting, as we were getting known within the world of design, we started getting a lot of invitations for lectures and whatnot, and for doing workshops. So in the 90s, I did a lot of traveling. I went to a lot of schools and did lectures, and all the AIGA chapters and whatnot. And so I got, whereas at one point I'd gotten sort of disillusioned with design and couldn't care less about it anymore. At that time, when I got back into it and when we got really into it with Emigre and with the typefaces, I was just eating, sleeping, and dreaming graphic design. I everything that was going on and everything that was being said. I read all the magazines, and so I went out and granted, there weren't that many people actually writing about design. It's not like I could go out and pick and choose. If there were just a handful of people writing, and if they did write something, and if I did come across something that I thought this is really something that's worthwhile to share with a larger audience, I would beg people, can I publish it? And they said, sure. We're not doing anything else with it. Nobody else is publishing 20 or 30,000 word essays. If you please go ahead. I had some very big pages to fill, so I was always happy to do that. But how did I find all these? I don't know, going out to people, going to the schools, and they'll find out about you. I mean, people did submit from time to time essays, but there wasn't that much. It was slim pickings. There weren't that many people writing. I mean, it's and understandably, I mean, because it's not anything that you can base a career on. I mean, it's most of the essays that we published, we would pay Jeffrey, or Lorraine $500 or $750, or we trade for typefaces. And that's what we could sort of afford, and you can't make a career out of that.
Right.
Did I mention Andrew Blauvelt? I have to mention Blauvelt, because I mean he was one of the great writers that I was so happy to have. Proud to publish his work too. But so it was slim pickings in the area of writers, and this is one of the big problems, and that's another reason perhaps why it never took off, and why it never became anything bigger than what it was, because nobody is going to commit to become a full-time design critic, graphic design critic. I mean, there's Rick Pointer and there's Steve Heller, and both of these guys have to do other stuff still to make a living off of it. So what you're getting is people who are writing on the side. It's not their main thing, which is really what you need if you want to develop people who are really, really good at this, and maybe develop a personal voice also with their writing. But there is just no outlet for it now. There wasn't then, except for Emigre, but that didn't make him any money, and there definitely isn't now.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said earlier about when you were disillusioned with graphic design and didn't want any part of it, and then as you were working on the magazine, you were kind of obsessed with it and, kind of reading everything. And it's kind of, I see a lot of parallels to that, to my own career and my own relationship to graphic design. And one of the reasons why I went back to grad school is because I was kind of feeling disillusioned with it and not sure it was the thing that I wanted to do anymore. And that then birthed this podcast in a lot of ways. And I'm kind of back into it in a lot of ways. And I'm curious if it was kind of working on the magazine that kind of brought that back to you, or even if you think that disillusionment helped the magazine a little bit, having to kind of wrestle with whether or not this field was even interesting to you is what made the content and kind of editorial decisions so interesting.
Yeah. I think what the big break for me came, I got disillusioned with graphic design, as I said earlier, because I couldn't find the affinity for all these clients, the corporation.
Yeah.
It's like, why would I want to work for these? It's like, I don't even like what these corporations are selling. Why would I want to be involved in that?
Yeah.
And then getting back into design was when I was making my own products.
Mm-hmm.
Our own magazine, our own typefaces.
Right.
We got into, when we got very ambitious, we had a small record label.
Right. Yeah.
We published our own books. At one point, we were literally making pajamas.
Right. That's right.
But it was making our own products and being our own client. Doing speculative work. All of a sudden I realized graphic design is a very, very valuable tool, a very valuable trade to know and to master, because in all of these things, as we're putting out records and books, graphic design plays a very, very big role.
Yeah.
But to me, it was much more fun to do it for myself
right.
than to the guy, who sort of comes in to put on a shine.
Yeah.
So that's how I got back into graphic design. It turns out that, I really like it as long as I do my own stuff.
Right. That makes sense. Do you think working on the magazine and all of these kind of other projects, did it change how you thought about design or kind of what you thought design could do or what design could be?
Well, for myself personally, I'm not sure how. That's a very good question. I have to think about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't have a quick answer for that.
Well,
I mean, design can be anything. It's like, this is the thing. Sometimes I sit around the dinner table with friends, and they're graphic designers, they say, and they talk about design, and I have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, so they're finding a way to use graphic design in ways that are totally alien to me, and I'm using graphic design in ways that is maybe alien to them. I mean, it can be anything you want it to be. I mean, there's no restrictions on it.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't answer your question.
No.
I have to think about it.
Honestly, I think that was actually a really good answer, because that's kind of what I was thinking about when I asked it and again, I was thinking about my own career and this podcast and kind of realizing that the more I'm in it and the more I'm doing these things, that graphic design is a lot bigger than I thought it was. And where I thought the borders were for that are not necessarily where they are, and that those are a lot blurrier, and there's a lot more movement there, right. Which is kind of what you were just saying.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because right now I'm a little bit back to where I was in the early '80s when I'd given up on design, because I'm no longer really very active as a graphic designer. I mean, I'm back to photography.
Yeah.
It's after since we don't do the magazine anymore, we stopped that after 20 years and 69 issues. We gave that up in 2005, and then I did work on the big Emigre book number 70, which is basically a reprint of the issues of Emigre, and then I worked on the reprint book of other type specimens, and doing all that graphic design related, a lot of production work and whatnot, and but now I'm trying slowly to come back to photography and do that, and I'm finding that I'm actually a graphic designer who's doing photography. I can't get it out of my head. It's like I think when I look through my viewfinder, I'm just handling whatever I see through there as if I'm a graphic designer. I'm making layouts, in my viewfinder.
Yeah.
Can't step away. It's and then of course it also resulted in the fact that I don't see myself as a photographer who makes editioned gallery prints. I'm much more attracted to using photography in books.
Yeah.
In print, because that combination, photography and books, they're just made for each other.
Yeah.
So I feel like a fish in water. I can design books. I love that, and I like to be a photographer. I like to make photographs and to marry these two. So I keep using graphic design as a way to do whatever I really want to do, whether it's publishing a magazine or putting out, music CDs or doing photography. It's all going through the funnel of graphic design, sort of.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I tend to do it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting though, because I remember a couple years, it was maybe a year or two ago, I was in a bookstore and I saw your book. I think it's called Still Lives USA.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't know that you were doing photography, and I didn't know that you had a photography background. And I picked it up and looked through it and was like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know he was doing this now, but I know exactly what you mean when you talk about it being still very much a kind of graphic design project. Everything, not just from the composition of the photos, but I think the kind of editing and ordering of the photos in those books are very much a design process.
Yes, absolutely. And, so the only trick is, can you establish yourself as a photographer when you don't make gallery prints? Can you become a photographer, if that's important? Maybe it's not important, but can you call yourself a photographer when you never actually make prints, and when the manifestation of your photographs are books and not prints? And that's sort of where I'm at right now. And what I'm finding out, it's kind of interesting, because the fact that I've had some success in graphic design to the world of photography means absolutely nothing.
Right.
They don't care at all. Right. They don't care to have the AIJ gold medal. That means nothing to them.
Yeah.
In that respect, so I'm trying to establish myself, or I'm sort of getting my feet wet and see how that would go. How do you become a photographer? When can you call yourself a photographer? And it turns out that's really, really hard. Right. And it's probably going to take another. I remember very well talking to April Greiman once, who said that there's nothing, there's nothing that you can call your own until you've worked at it for at least 10 years.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, for no matter what you do, if you want to become a great graphic designer, right out of school, forget it. You're not going to, you're going to have to work at it, to call what you do your own. And it's the same with photography. And I think that's where I'm right now with my photography. I'm at the very, very beginning. So I'm starting to catch up with the history of photography. I'm starting to read all these books. I was just in Tokyo, and I'm finding out this incredible world of photo books, which is a huge tradition in Japan.
Yeah.
Photo book there is a well-established art form, but I'm only now catching up on all of that and see what the history of that is, and how I can perhaps learn from that and how I fit into that. But it's something that I'm going to work on and have to work on very, very hard before I can expect anybody
Right.
consider what I do to be, photography or of any value.
I want to ask you something about that, and it's something that you actually said to me in an email when we were scheduling this that struck me, and I found interesting because it was something that I hadn't realized about myself, where you said that in your photography work, you're kind of consciously not thinking about theory or not trying to bring theory into that work. And the reason I found that interesting is I've been interested in photography for as long as design. I always have one or two cameras with me. I've put together some photo books for myself, and I realized that it's the same way for me. I've never kind of thought about photo theory in the way that I think about design theory, which is so central to the way I think about my work. Is there a reason, or could you kind of talk about that a little bit more, about kind of your relationship to theory in photography?
Yeah, I already broke that promise.
Okay.
For promise. What I said to you, I was trying to stay away from theory.
All right, never mind then.
No, okay, I can explain. I mean, I've actually started a small magazine again. It's called Archive. And it's just my photography. It's really a catalog, and I've put out 6 issues, and all it has is captions. There's no writing of any kind. And that sort of goes along with the idea. I just want to make photographs. I just want to make pictures and images, and not get my head full of all kinds of complicated ideas.
Right. Yep.
But somehow or another, just the last couple of days, I feel like I need a little introduction to explain what it is, what I'm doing, and that's just that's just for myself. I just want to help myself. I want to sort of find out what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I started writing. I started asking these questions to myself, like, what's going on here? And I tried to write something sensible. And it reminds me of when I tried to write for Emigre, my introductions in Emigre.
Yeah.
I struggle with it so tremendously. And I'm sure all writers do it. There's nothing easy about writing, but it doesn't come natural to me. And I just spent days and weeks, like one paragraph.
Yeah.
And I show it to Zuzana, and she laughs at it. She goes like, "What?" And she has corrections, so she says, "Yeah, this is pretty cool." And then I rewrite the whole thing again. I have such a hard time with it, but I keep trying it because I want to figure out for myself, what exactly am I trying to say with these photographs? What am I doing? This also reminds me of, just to sort of go off on a tangent.
Yeah, go for it.
When we sort of came to the end of Emigre, and the whole idea of blogs came up, I was so ill-suited for blogs because people were asking why didn't Emigre do a blog, and I go, I can't do it. I can't think on my feet really well.
Oh yeah.
I'm not a quick thinker. I need a lot of time to flesh out these ideas. And I remember Armin Witt when he still had Speak Up.
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting blog. And at that time, the very beginning, people were still writing fairly lengthy replies.
Yep.
It wasn't 140 characters. People were doing it. And I remember posting a few replies, sort of trying to get into it. And I remember writing these 2 or 3 paragraph replies, and it would take me like 3 or 4 days to write.
Yeah.
And then I would sit with my finger hovering over the mouse, like, shall I send it or not? It's like this is not for me. And that's why Emigre never got involved in blogs, and this sort of drive-by criticism, that you can see under consideration, where people talk about branding and logos. I mean, it's great that it exists. I'm sure. Obviously, it's really popular, but I can't get it. That's just not for me, because writing is really difficult. It really is. And I also think it's when you write something, I think it's really. I always think it's going to last.
Right.
I want it to be halfway decent.
Yeah.
So this old-fashioned idea. That's why I'm very fearful of these interviews. This is like everything I've said now. That's it. You're not going to edit it. That's it. And I it was really actually daunting for me to do this interview. Also, or mostly maybe because I had listened to Elliot Earls'
Oh,
interview,
yeah.
which I think was one of the most brilliant interviews
Oh,
on
good.
both sides, you
Yeah.
and him, that I've ever heard done with a graphic designer. It was
Oh,
so inspirational. I thought, I listened to it. I was like, Jesus, I want to go back to school and study with Elliot. I
yeah.
like pull that fella, go back at a
Yeah, right.
age of 62. I thought that was an amazing, amazing interview. I mean, the denseness of what Elliot was saying and the ideas that he, off the top of
Yeah.
his head, was able to sort of communicate. I can't do it. As is, this is very obvious right now. Anyways, to go back to what we're talking about, yeah, the writing. I'm trying it again, but it's difficult. But
Yeah.
it does help me because it does feed back into what I'm doing
Yeah.
a little bit. I have to focus myself from time to time, and writing helps me focus.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, thank you so much for the compliment on Elliot's. That it really means a lot, and I'm glad that you thought it was interesting, because I felt like I was the same way, and I was a part of it, where he was just going so I felt like I was just trying to catch up to make sure that I could follow up with his questions, because I felt like I wasn't thinking fast enough. So I'm glad that didn't
Well, you're
come
doing
through.
very well. You were doing very well now too. And by the way, no disrespect to all the other people that you interviewed. I think I'm really enjoying listening to all of them. It's really interesting how people's. This is the great thing about these interviews. It's like people's personalities come through.
Right.
So which you don't see in the writing, because the writing can be very different from how people speak, obviously.
Yeah. Oh well, but that actually kind of leads into the next couple questions I had, which start to kind of wrap this up a little bit.
There's
I have a couple more quick questions. But because I thought it was interesting, I wanted to ask you about ending the magazine and blogging. And I know you've talked about that. We've talked about it already, and I know you've talked about that in other interviews that you've done. But I'm kind of curious about when you knew that the magazine was done. And was that kind of related to your own relationship to graphic design, or was it kind of related to blogs and just the changing way that people were talking?
I think it was all of those things together, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
And, some people may say, I may even agree that we may have even done it a little too long. Although, there was a little glimpse there right towards the end when we were almost completely a design theory magazine. I was sort of, there was some very interesting new voices coming forward. There was Rob Gianpietro and Dmitry Siegel and David Kamianka and Randy Nakamura.
Yeah.
They had just all started to write, and I thought, oh my God, this is. Maybe there's hope here. That, these guys were writing really interesting stuff, but the thing is, the audience for it didn't grow, and this was always the problem with design writing. There was really no audience for it. I mean, Emigre, we've gone, we've sold subscriptions. We could never sell more than about 2,000 to 2,500 subscriptions, and then maybe distribute 2,000 or 3,000 copies to stores. Mm-hmm. At one point, we decided to make the magazine free, because we figured that the magazine is a great promotional tool for the typefaces, and we're sort of limiting ourselves by selling subscriptions. Maybe we should just make the magazine for free.
Oh, interesting.
Get much larger circulation, which we did, and we said, we basically send out. We got about 40 to 50,000 copies for each issue, which we send out for free to our mailing list, and everybody loved it. Then we decided it got to be very expensive to do this for a long time, but it cost a fortune to do it.
I bet.
And it was all sustained by the sales of the typefaces. So then when we switched it back, after having a circulation of about 1,000 copies, we switched it back to subscriptions. And again, we could not sell more than 2,000 or 2,500 copies. And these were the people that were really dedicated to the magazine and who were probably interested in reading, all the design theory that we were publishing. So there was never really a room to grow. And even those last 6 issues, which were co-published with Princeton Architectural Press, where we thought, maybe they have an inlet to a larger audience that is into it did not. If anything, it shrank. Even it got to be smaller. So in the end, you go like, we were basically talking to the same small group of people all the time. It did not grow. So that didn't help.
Right.
Continuing. That was one of the reasons also where we thought, well, maybe this is the end of it. It was a lot of work to do it. It was an enormous amount of work. It cost a lot of money. And, as our audience who are really into reading design theory didn't grow, and at the same time when the blogs came out and the internet and all this kind of stuff, that really exploded. Yeah. People seem to love that. We thought, okay, maybe that's what people want. Yeah. And I kind of, I didn't feel the same excitement anymore for graphic design. It's like, the stuff that people were really getting excited about, for instance, Under Consideration, which is a very popular blog, logos and branding, it does not interest me at all. But that seemed to interest a lot of graphic designers. And obviously, that's their bread and butter. Yeah. I can totally see that. But it didn't interest me. I didn't see any kind of an inlet for that to talk about with any kind of, passion to it. Yeah. So all these things combined, we thought, and again, nothing lasts forever. We thought, let's just let's just kill it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, I'm curious kind of, what's your relationship to it now? Do you think you would ever come back to graphic design or to design criticism, if we want to call it that, or design writing?
I don't know. I've never made many plans. People always ask us, all the way through our careers with Emigre, it's like, what is your 5-year plan? It's like a 5-year plan. Yeah. We're happy to get through the next 5 days. Yeah. And for this too, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Right now my head is full of photography and I should say that I don't want to shortchange my company. I mean, our paychecks still come from Emigre, and we spend, Zuzana too. We spent a great deal of our time still selling typefaces. I mean, that hasn't really gone away. Right. And that keeps us really, really busy. I mean, Zuzana has been very hard at work doing, sort of retooling a lot of our very old typefaces, sort of bring them into the 21st century with, expanded character sets and whatnot. So that continues. Another thing that I've been very busy with the last year is, if there's still time to talk about all this, is that, Emigre donated its entire archive to the Letterform Archive in San Francisco. I don't know if you're familiar with the Letterform Archive, but it's a nonprofit. It's a brand new archive that specializes in graphic design and type design. And it was started by Rob Saunders in San Francisco. It started with his personal collection of graphic design and type design related publishings, and it's now probably one of the largest archives of design and type design in the world. It is an amazing thing, and we decided to archive everything we've ever produced, all our correspondence that existed from the magazine and the correspondence with the type designers, all the preparatory sketches of Zuzana's typefaces, all the old paste-up boards. We found these old paste-up boards of Emigre #1, which I had saved. That's all at the Letterform Archive, and it's a great place to go. You cannot imagine what they have there. I mean, you can't think of anything. Yeah, the most obscure little type specimens that were published in the 20s. They'll have copies of it, and you can go there and you can actually look at it and browse through it and whatnot. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. And I've been very involved in sort of housing our archive there. And so busy with all of these graphic design related things still.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is because as I had mentioned to you, I kind of discovered graphic design in the early 2000s as a teenager, and this was right at the end of Emigre. I remember that the end of the magazine, I should say, and I remember reading the older issues and feeling like I had just missed like the best moment in graphic design history, just with the Macintosh and with postmodernism and all of these people talking about theory and criticism and Emigre, and I thought I had kind of missed it all. And in a way, I think that there was something really special about that time that I probably did miss. But I'm curious if you think, kind of from your point of view, are there other big changes in the profession that could allow for that type of thing again, where everyone's talking about the same thing? There is work that's kind of agitates people a little bit, like we talked about earlier. It's all kind of there aren't these types of debates anymore. Do you see anything like that coming again, or is there a certain stasis now?
I don't. It's a question. I talk about this with all my good old buddies from the old days. Yeah. We go over this again and again, and we all ask that question, and I don't know the answer. And I always say it's like, I don't know, there may be some kids somewhere in a garage doing some amazing stuff. We don't know about it, and perhaps by the time they come up with something, we're gonna dump on them. We're gonna play the old grumpy guys.
Right.
We're going to be the Massimo Vignellis, and but it hasn't happened yet. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And again, it was a very, it was a very special time in a way. I mean, the Macintosh did have a lot to do with it. It really, and the really the exciting times, if you look back in time, the history of graphic design, when things really changed was when technologies changed, Yep. So we were right in the middle of one of those. So we were just lucky, we were super lucky. We really realized that. And there was just a confluence of very interesting things all coming together like a big bang, sort of.
Yeah.
I'm sure it can happen again.
Yeah.
And and you're going to be ready for it. You're set up very nicely.
I mean, I hope so.
I mean, that's what we realized when we were doing it. We weren't so aware of it at the time. I mean, it's like, but we figured it out, and we realized the least we can do is because it was being ignored for, the Macintosh was ignored for a long time. Designers thought it was a step back. Mm-hmm. I'd read Print magazine in 1987, and there was nothing in there about it. And it was like, how come they're not talking about this?
Right.
It's like me and my friends, we were talking about this stuff, and we were going like, this is like amazing what's happening. Yeah. Nobody else was talking. So we thought, well, why don't we talk about it? And we decided, and on hindsight, we were literally writing our own history. We were sort of, walking the walk and talking the talk, and we were going to make sure that we were going to record it, what was going on.
Yeah.
We were ready for it, and it turned out that we were there at a very, very special time.
Yeah.
But sure, it can happen again. It happens all the time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I just, I love that was kind of your approach, and that you did record all of that, and you did talk about those things, and I feel like so much of my interest in design, so much of how I think about design, so much of this podcast and this project has origins to what you were publishing in Emigre. And I've talked to Keedy and Rob Giampetro and Dimitri Siegel and Ann Burdick. And so I'm just like, I feel like even though what you were writing and publishing at the time was so specific for that time, it's like you said, there's a certain timelessness to it where that is still having an effect on designers working today. And so that's why I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation, and just, thank you for the work that you've done and for this for taking the time to talk, because so much of this podcast is about me missing Emigre in a lot of ways. So thank you so much.
You're very kind. You're making me feel very old. But I really admire what you're doing. Like I said, the fact that you get to talk to all these people, I think it's not easy to do that. You have to cajole some people probably. Yeah. You have to be very organized. You're obviously extremely well prepared. You really research the stuff. I think that's super valuable. You're doing an amazing job. You're very easy to talk to. I was scared to be on this interview. You made it very easy. I think you have a real talent for this, and I'm just super honored to be on your program. Oh. I hope it's going on for a long, long time. And I hope it's going to be part of, and it's going to cover all kinds of huge big bangs in the world of design that, who knows, might happen very soon. Things will get very excited again, and you'll be there to record.
Well, thank you so much. That really means so much coming from you. And if it makes you feel any better, both of us were scared and nervous for this one. But I thought it was great. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Jarrett.
This episode was recorded on March 7th, 2018. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and SoundCloud, and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.